Arizona Territory, 1883. The desert wind carried dust and broken promises as Rebecca Matthews stepped down from the stagecoach at Pine Ridge Station. Her traveling dress, once pristine navy blue, now bore the stains of a 1,000-mile journey. From Boston. In her worn leather satchel, she clutched a tintype photograph of the man who had promised her a new life, Jacob Thornfield, a merchant who claimed to have established profitable trade relationships with the nearby Cherokee settlement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Pine Ridge sprawled before her like a collection of wooden boxes scattered across the red earth. Adobe buildings mixed with hastily constructed timber structures, their walls baking under the relentless southwestern sun. Unlike the green valleys and tree-lined streets of her New England hometown, this landscape seemed to stretch endlessly toward purple mountains that shimmered in the heat. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she adjusted her bonnet, scanning the small crowd gathered near the station. The letter in her pocket, read so many times the paper had grown soft, promised that Jacob would meet her here at precisely 2 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. She had sold everything she owned to make this journey, her mother's china, her father's books, even the modest boarding house she had inherited after their deaths from consumption. "You looking for someone, miss?" The station master emerged from his office, a thin man with sun-weathered skin and suspicious eyes. His gaze lingered disapprovingly on her traveling bag, then shifted to the Cherokee individuals conducting business near the freight platform. "Mr. Jacob Thornfield," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the crisp consonants of her Boston upbringing. "He operates a trading post here and was expecting my arrival." The station master's expression shifted to something between pity and discomfort. He glanced toward a group of Cherokee men loading supplies onto a wagon, then back to Rebecca. "Ma'am, you might want to step inside where it's cooler. There's something you ought to know." A cold dread settled in Rebecca's stomach despite the desert heat. She followed the man into the dim interior of the station office, where a ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, providing minimal relief. The walls were decorated with territorial maps and posted notices about train schedules and territorial regulations. "This came for you 3 days ago," the station master said, retrieving an envelope from his desk drawer. "Mr. Thornfield left specific instructions to give it to any woman arriving on the Tuesday stage from back east." Rebecca's hands shook as she broke the wax seal. The handwriting was Jacob's familiar script, but the words felt like physical blows. "Miss Matthews, I find myself compelled to withdraw my offer of marriage due to circumstances that have recently come to my attention. My business relationships with the Cherokee community have become complicated. The territorial authorities have expressed concerns about my association with their settlement, and I cannot risk my commercial enterprises by proceeding with our arrangement. I have relocated my operations to California, where opportunities are more favorable. Enclosed is $20 for your return passage. I offer my sincere regrets for any inconvenience. $20. The sum that represented her entire future, barely enough for passage halfway back to Boston, and certainly insufficient to reclaim the life she had abandoned. Rebecca read the letter twice, her breath coming in short gasps as the reality of her situation crystallized. "Ma'am." The station master's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "You all right?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders, drawing upon the steel that had sustained her through her parents' illness and death. "Is there lodging available in town?" "Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house on Main Street," he said carefully. "Though I should mention, it's $2 a night, and she's particular about the kind of guests she accepts." The implication was clear. A woman alone, abandoned by her intended husband, would not be welcomed in respectable establishments. Rebecca had encountered such attitudes before, but never when she was this vulnerable, this far from anything familiar, She gathered her belongings and stepped back into the blazing afternoon sun. Pine Ridge's main street stretched before her. A dusty thoroughfare lined with businesses that seemed to eye her arrival with collective suspicion. The Cherokee individuals she had noticed earlier were completing their transactions at the freight office, their presence adding another layer of complexity to her already dire circumstances. The boarding house proved to be exactly what she had feared, a narrow two-story building with peeling paint and judgmental windows. Mrs. Henderson, a severe woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, listened to Rebecca's request with obvious disapproval. $2 a night, paid in advance, she stated curtly. Meals are extra, and I don't tolerate visitors or unseemly behavior. Rebecca counted out $4, watching her meager resources dwindle. I may need to stay several days while I arrange transportation. Double quotes. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. Where exactly are you planning to go, miss? It's unusual for a young woman to travel alone to these parts without proper arrangements. My circumstances have changed, Rebecca replied. Carefully. I'm considering my options. Well, see that you consider them quietly. This is a respectable establishment. The room Mrs. Henderson provided was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that overlooked the stable yard. Rebecca sat on the edge of the mattress and allowed herself a moment of complete despair. Everything she had planned, every hope she had nurtured during the long journey west, had crumbled in the space of a single letter, but despair was a luxury she could not afford. $20 would not last long, and she needed to understand her situation more clearly. After washing the travel dust from her face and hands, Rebecca ventured back onto Main Street to explore her limited options. Pine Ridge revealed itself to be a community caught between worlds. White settlers operated most of the businesses: the general store, the saloon, the blacksmith shop, but Cherokee individuals moved through the town with an air of belonging that suggested their presence was not merely tolerated, but integral to the community's function. This was evidently the source of Jacob Thornfield's complications. At the general store, Rebecca learned more about the delicate balance that governed Pine Ridge. The proprietor, a chatty man named Bill Carson, seemed eager to share local information with a newcomer. The Cherokee settlement's about 5 miles north, he explained while weighing out flour for another customer. They've been here longer than any of us white folks, got legal title to their land through some treaty arrangement. Chief Running Bear, a fair man, does good business with the town, but there's some who think we shouldn't be so friendly with them. And Mr. Thornfield's trading post? Rebecca inquired. Carson's expression darkened. Thornfield was doing real well until some territorial officials started asking questions about his dealings. See, there's folks in the government who don't like it when white men get too cozy with the Cherokee. Makes them nervous about territorial development plans. Rebecca began to understand the political pressures that had prompted Jacob's hasty departure. Her abandoned status was not merely personal rejection, but collateral damage in larger conflicts over land, culture, and territorial control. As she continued her exploration of the town, Rebecca became aware of subtle but persistent hostility. Conversations stopped when she passed. Women whispered behind shop windows. Men tipped their hats with perfunctory politeness that carried undertones of suspicion. Word of her abandonment had apparently spread quickly through the small community. At the dry goods store, she overheard 2 women discussing her situation with obvious disapproval. A decent woman doesn't travel such distances without proper chaperonage, one declared. There's something unseemly about the whole arrangement. And arriving just when all this trouble with the Cherokee is stirring up, added the other. Poor timing, if you ask me. Rebecca pretended to examine bolts of fabric while listening to their assessment of her character and circumstances. Their judgment stung, but it also revealed important information about the community's current tensions regarding the Cherokee settlement. By evening, Rebecca had formed a clearer picture of her predicament. She was stranded in a town where her presence was viewed with suspicion, her resources were rapidly dwindling, and her options appeared to be limited to returning east in disgrace or somehow establishing herself in a community that had already judged her unfavorably. Dinner at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a silent affair. The other guests, two traveling salesmen and an elderly widow, studiously avoided conversation with her. The message was clear. She was not welcome to integrate into their temporary community. That night, as Rebecca lay on the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of wind through sparse vegetation, she forced herself to confront the harsh reality of her situation. She had approximately $16 remaining, no immediate prospects for employment, and no connections that might provide assistance, but she had survived her parents' deaths, managed a boarding house, and traveled across a continent. She possessed more resilience than these strangers realized. Whatever her next steps might be, she would not surrender to despair or retreat in defeat. The following morning brought both clarity and unexpected complication. Rebecca woke early and walked to the edge of town where the desert stretched toward distant mountains. The sunrise painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, revealing a stark beauty that was beginning to grow on her despite her circumstances. She was standing near a cluster of ancient cottonwood trees when she noticed riders approaching from the north. 3 Cherokee men on horseback, moving with easy confidence across the desert terrain. As they drew closer, Rebecca could see they were well-equipped and purposeful in their travel, not casual visitors to the town. The lead rider was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with long black hair and traditional dress mixed with elements of contemporary clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, and intricate beadwork that caught the morning light. His bearing suggested authority despite his youth, and something in his dark eyes seemed to assess not just her presence, but her very essence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their gazes met across the distance, and Rebecca felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, not of familiarity, but of some deeper connection she could not name. The young man reined in his horse, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but instead felt strangely reassuring. "You are the woman who came on the stage," he said in perfect English, his voice carrying an accent that was barely perceptible. "The one Jacob Thornfield abandoned." Rebecca straightened, surprised by his direct approach. "I am Rebecca Matthews, and you are?" "Thomas Crowfeather." He dismounted gracefully, his companions remaining mounted but alert. "I knew Thornfield. He spoke of you before he disappeared like a rabbit when the territorial officials began their threats." The comparison drew a surprised laugh from Rebecca. "A rabbit? Yes, that seems accurate." Thomas's expression remained serious, but something flickered in his dark eyes that might have been appreciation for her spirit. "You should know that the town does not welcome you. They believe your presence brings complications they do not wish to face." "So I have discovered," Rebecca replied. "Though I fail to understand how my personal misfortune threatens anyone, you represent change," Thomas said simply. "And change frightens those who profit from existing arrangements." His companions exchanged words in Cherokee, their tone suggesting urgency. Thomas nodded and turned back to Rebecca. "We must continue to go to town, but ... He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "There are things you should understand about your situation here. Perhaps we will speak again." As the 3 riders continued toward Pine Ridge, Rebecca found herself both intrigued and confused by the encounter. Thomas Crowfeather had spoken to her with respect and directness, treating her abandonment as a political maneuver rather than personal failure. His perspective offered a different framework for understanding her circumstances, one that placed her situation within larger conflicts rather than individual inadequacy. Returning to the boarding house, Rebecca discovered that her brief conversation with the Cherokee riders had not gone unnoticed. Mrs. Henderson intercepted her at the front door, her face flushed with disapproval. "Miss Matthews, I feel compelled to advise you about maintaining appropriate associations while you're a guest in my establishment," she began sternly. "This is a respectable house, and I cannot have guests who fraternize with inappropriate individuals." "I spoke briefly with travelers on the road," Rebecca replied calmly. "I was not aware that conversation constituted fraternization." "Those were Cherokee men," Mrs. Henderson said, as if this explained everything. "Given the current tensions in town, it would be wise for you to avoid any contact with them. It reflects poorly on your character and my establishment." Rebecca felt a flash of anger at the woman's presumption. "My character is my own concern, Mrs. Henderson. As long as I pay your rates and follow your house rules, my conversations are not subject to your approval." The boarding house owner's face darkened. "Perhaps you should consider whether Pine Ridge is the appropriate place for someone with your liberal attitudes towards social boundaries." The threat was clear. Rebecca was being warned to conform to local prejudices or face ejection from her only shelter. The conversation with Thomas Crow Feather had somehow marked her as dangerous, aligning her with the very tensions that had driven Jacob Thornfield away. But rather than feeling intimidated, Rebecca discovered a growing determination to understand the forces that had shaped her circumstances. If her presence in Pine Ridge was politically complicated, she needed to understand why. If her brief exchange with Thomas Crow Feather had branded her as problematic, she would learn what that truly meant. The rejected mail-order bride was beginning to realize that her abandonment might have saved her from a life constrained by the prejudices that now threatened her temporary refuge. Whatever came next, it would be on her own terms, guided by her own judgment rather than the expectations of those who would reduce her to either commodity or cautionary tale. The third day in Pine Ridge brought unexpected visitors and revelations that would shatter Rebecca's understanding of her predicament. She awoke to the sound of urgent voices outside her window, not the usual morning bustle of the town, but something more agitated and purposeful. Peering through the grimy glass, Rebecca saw a delegation of Cherokee men gathered in the street below. Unlike Thomas Crow Feather's small party, this group commanded immediate attention. Their leader was an imposing figure with silver-streaked hair and elaborate traditional dress that spoke of high rank. Even from her elevated position, Rebecca could sense the authority that radiated from his bearing. Mrs. Henderson's voice carried up the stairwell, sharp with anxiety. "Miss Matthews, you have visitors requesting your presence. Most irregular, but they insist it's urgent business." Rebecca dressed quickly, her pulse quickening with apprehension. What could Cherokee leaders possibly want with an abandoned mail-order bride? As she descended the narrow staircase, she could hear Mrs. Henderson's nervous chatter echoing from the front parlor. "I've told them this is highly unusual," the boarding house owner was saying. "Young ladies don't receive delegations of anyone really, but they seem quite determined." In the cramped parlor, Rebecca found herself facing 5 Cherokee men arranged in formal positions that suggested ceremonial importance. The eldest stepped forward with dignified bearing, his weathered face grave with purpose. "Miss Rebecca Matthews," he said in measured English, "I am Chief Running Bear of the Northern Valley Band. We come on urgent business that concerns your presence in this territory." Rebecca curtsied slightly, uncertain of proper protocol, but sensing the gravity of the moment. "Chief Running Bear, I'm honored by your visit, though I confess confusion about what business we might share." The chief's dark eyes studied her with penetrating intensity. "You have spoken with my son, Thomas Crow Feather." "Briefly, yesterday morning," Rebecca confirmed. "He mentioned knowing Mr. Thornfield." A shadow crossed Chief Running Bear's features. "What my son did not tell you is that he stands banished from our people. His presence in this territory violates the judgment of our council, and his contact with you. The chief paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. His contact with you fulfills ancient warnings that threaten our community's survival. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly from her position near the doorway. Rebecca felt the floor seem to shift beneath her feet as implications cascaded through her mind. "I don't understand," she managed. "What warnings? What does my presence have to do with your son's banishment?" Another member of the delegation stepped forward, a younger man with intricate tattoos marking his arms and the bearing of a spiritual leader. "I am Joseph Standing Wolf, keeper of our sacred traditions. 3 seasons ago, our medicine woman received visions of a woman from the distant sunrise who would arrive bearing the mark of abandonment. This woman would possess the power to either restore our banished son or complete his destruction." Rebecca's throat constricted. "You believe I'm this woman from your vision?" "Your hair carries the color of autumn fire," Standing Wolf continued, gesturing toward Rebecca's auburn curls. "Your eyes hold the green of deep waters. You came from the eastern lands bearing letters of rejection. These signs match the prophecy exactly." Chief Running Bear's expression hardened. "My son was banished for challenging tribal law, for refusing an arranged marriage that would unite our band with our southern neighbors. His defiance threatened political alliances essential for our survival. The medicine woman's vision warned that his return would be tied to a woman whose presence would force our people to choose between ancient traditions and dangerous change." The complexity of the situation overwhelmed Rebecca. She had stumbled into tribal politics and spiritual prophecies that she couldn't begin to comprehend. "What exactly are you asking of me?" "We ask that you leave this territory immediately," Chief Running Bear stated firmly. "Your continued presence draws my son back to places he is forbidden to enter. Already he circles our borders like a wolf. Denied his pack. If he attempts to return because of you, the consequences will destroy more than just his life." Rebecca felt a surge of indignation despite her precarious circumstances. "With respect, Chief Running Bear, I came here with no knowledge of your son's existence, let alone his banishment. I have no intention of interfering in tribal affairs, but I will not be driven away because of superstitions about my hair color and the direction I traveled." Standing Wolf's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval. "She has the spirit the vision described, fire that burns but does not consume. Spirit that will consume us all if she remains," countered another delegation member, a warrior whose scars spoke of many battles. "The prophecy speaks of choice, not predetermined fate. We can still prevent the destruction by removing the catalyst." Chief Running Bear raised a hand for silence. "Miss Matthews, you do not comprehend the forces you have set in motion simply by existing. My son was our most promising warrior, destined to lead after me. His refusal to accept the marriage arrangement was not mere rebellion, it was betrayal of obligations that stretch back generations. The Southern Band's daughter he rejected now stands unmarried, her father threatening war unless the insult is answered." Rebecca absorbed this information with growing unease. "And Thomas's banishment was meant to resolve this situation?" "It was meant to demonstrate our commitment to honoring the alliance," the chief replied grimly. "But banishment can be lifted if certain conditions are met." The medicine woman's vision suggested that the woman from the sunrise would provide either the means for honorable return or the final catalyst for his complete exile from all Cherokee lands. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat nervously from the doorway. "Perhaps this discussion would be better conducted elsewhere? My other guests are becoming concerned." Chief Running Bear nodded curtly. "We have said what was necessary." He turned back to Rebecca with formal dignity. "Consider carefully, Miss Matthews. Your choices will echo far beyond your own life." After the delegation departed, Rebecca found herself alone in the parlor with Mrs. Henderson, whose face had gone pale with agitation. "Miss Matthews, I must insist that you settle your account and depart immediately," the boarding house owner declared. I cannot have my establishment associated with whatever this complication represents. The Cherokee delegation, the prophecies, the banished son. It's all far too irregular for a respectable house. Rebecca's temper finally snapped. Mrs. Henderson, I have paid for my room, conducted myself with perfect propriety, and done nothing to invite these complications beyond existing in a manner that apparently fulfills someone else's spiritual vision. I will not be ejected from paid lodging because circumstances beyond my control make you uncomfortable. Then I shall refund your remaining nights, Mrs. Henderson replied stiffly. But I cannot permit you to stay. Within the hour, Rebecca found herself standing in Pine Ridge's dusty main street with her traveling bag and no shelter. The few passers-by who witnessed her ejection from the boarding house quickened their pace, clearly unwilling to involve themselves in whatever scandal she represented. The general store offered no refuge. Bill Carson met her inquiry about temporary lodging with nervous stammering about his wife's sensibilities. The saloon was obviously inappropriate, and the other businesses she approached found various excuses to deny her assistance. As the afternoon sun climbed toward its brutal peak, Rebecca sought shade under the cottonwood trees at the town's edge where she had first encountered Thomas Crowfeather. The irony was bitter. She had fled from Boston to escape the constraints of society's judgment, only to find herself trapped by different, but equally rigid expectations in this frontier community. She was sitting on her traveling bag, contemplating her rapidly diminishing options, when hoofbeats approached from the north. A single rider emerged from the heat shimmer, Thomas Crowfeather, mounted on a paint horse and leading a second mount. He dismounted with fluid grace, his expression unreadable as he assessed her obvious predicament. The delegation found you. They did, Rebecca confirmed, too exhausted for pretense. Your father believes I'm some prophesied woman who will either restore or destroy you. Mrs. Henderson believes I'm a scandal that threatens her establishment's reputation. The town believes I'm a complication they'd prefer to eliminate. I'm beginning to think they're all correct. Thomas studied her with those penetrating dark eyes. What do you believe? I believe I'm a woman who made poor choices and now finds herself trapped in circumstances beyond her control or understanding, Rebecca replied honestly. I also believe that I'm tired of being told what my presence means to other people without anyone bothering to ask what I might want for myself. A slight smile played at the corners of Thomas's mouth. And what do you want for yourself? Shelter for starters, Rebecca said with weary humor, followed by enough understanding of this situation to make informed decisions, rather than simply reacting to other people's fears and prophecies. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Rebecca and the town behind her. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful decision. There is a place you can stay, he said finally. An abandoned trading post about 10 miles north of here. Thornfield used it as a storage depot before his departure. It has shelter, a well, and enough supplies to sustain someone for several weeks. And the cost of this generosity? Rebecca asked, recognizing that nothing in her current circumstances came without complications. Your willingness to hear the complete truth about why my father fears your presence, Thomas replied. The delegation told you about banishment and prophecy, but they omitted crucial details that explain why your choice matters so significantly. Rebecca considered the offer. The alternative was remaining in Pine Ridge to face continuing hostility with diminishing resources, or attempting to travel elsewhere with insufficient funds and no destination. At least Thomas's proposal offered temporary respite and promised explanations for the bizarre circumstances surrounding her arrival. Very well, she decided. But I want your word that this shelter comes with no obligations beyond listening to your explanations. You have it, Thomas assured her. Though I should warn you that understanding the full truth may make your choices more difficult, not easier. As they rode north across the desert landscape, Thomas began to reveal the complexities that the delegation had only hinted at. His banishment had not been simply about refusing a marriage arrangement. It had been about challenging the fundamental authority structure that governed Cherokee interactions with both the U.S. government and neighboring tribes. The woman I was supposed to marry is named Elena Windsong, Thomas explained as their horses picked their way across a rocky arroyo. Her father, Chief Black Hawk, controls territory that contains the only reliable water sources for 3 bands during drought years. The marriage was arranged to secure access to those resources for our people. But you refused, Rebecca observed. I refused because Elena Windsong loves another man, and because the marriage would have required me to support policies I believe will ultimately destroy our people, Thomas said quietly. Chief Black Hawk advocates complete accommodation with white territorial authorities. He believes survival depends on abandoning traditional ways and adopting white customs, white religion, white law. Rebecca began to understand the deeper implications. And your father supports this approach? My father believes survival requires compromise, even painful compromise, Thomas replied. He sees Chief Black Hawk's alliance as essential protection against government forces that could scatter our people across distant reservations. I believe such protection comes at the cost of everything that makes us Cherokee. They crested a low ridge, and the abandoned trading post came into view, a cluster of adobe buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with corrals and outbuildings that spoke of more prosperous times. The structures appeared sound despite their emptiness, and Rebecca could see the stone wellhead that promised fresh water. As they approached the buildings, Thomas continued his explanation. My refusal to marry Elena Windsong was seen as betrayal not just of personal obligation, but of the survival strategy my father and the council had adopted. The banishment was meant to demonstrate our commitment to the alliance while removing my influence from young warriors who might follow my example. And the prophecy? Rebecca asked as they dismounted near the main building. Thomas's expression grew troubled. The medicine woman, Singing Crow, is my grandmother. Her visions have guided our people through many crises, but this one. He paused, seeming to struggle with the implications. This one suggests that the arrival of the woman from the sunrise will force a choice that determines not just my fate, but the future path of our entire band. Inside the trading post's main room, Rebecca found evidence of Jacob Thornfield's hasty departure: scattered papers, abandoned goods, and the lingering scent of tobacco and leather goods. But the building was structurally sound, with a stone fireplace and windows that could be secured against the desert's extremes. According to Singing Crow's vision, Thomas continued, the woman from the sunrise will possess a gift that our people need, but accepting that gift will require abandoning the path of accommodation that my father believes ensures our survival. Rebecca sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the weight of expectation and symbolism being attached to her presence. What kind of gift? The vision was not specific, Thomas admitted. But Singing Crow spoke of healing, not just of bodies, but of the spirit wounds that come from abandoning one's true nature in pursuit of safety. As Thomas helped Rebecca explore the trading post and identify supplies left behind by Thornfield, she found herself studying this man whose life had become entangled with hers through forces neither of them controlled. His intelligence was evident in his thoughtful responses to her questions, his physical capabilities apparent in his easy mastery of the desert environment, and his integrity suggested by his willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for principles. Why are you helping me? She asked as they drew water from the well in the fading afternoon light. Your father made it clear that my presence in this territory brings danger to you and your people. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the bucket descend into the darkness. Because I believe the choice my grandmother's vision describes is not about you, he said finally. It's about whether our people will continue to surrender pieces. of our identity in pursuit of security that may prove illusory, or whether we will find the courage to preserve what makes us who we are, even at great cost. And you believe I somehow represent that choice. I believe you represent the possibility of a different path, Thomas replied, meeting her gaze directly. You came west seeking security through marriage to a stranger, but when that safety was denied, you did not simply retreat to familiar surroundings. You chose to remain and face uncertainty rather than accept defeat. Rebecca felt something shift in her understanding of her own journey. You see my abandonment as courage rather than catastrophe. I see a woman who refuses to be diminished by circumstances beyond her control, Thomas said quietly. That refusal is what my people need to remember, whether the medicine woman's prophecy proves true or false. As the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, Rebecca Matthews found herself contemplating a future she could never have imagined when she boarded that train in Boston. The abandoned trading post offered temporary refuge, but she was beginning to realize that her choices in this place would determine far more than just her own survival. Thomas Crowfeather had revealed himself to be not just a banished warrior, but a man whose principles had cost him everything he had been raised to value. His willingness to help her, despite the risks, suggested depths of character that Jacob Thornfield had never possessed, but the weight of prophecy and political consequence attached to her presence felt overwhelming. How could a rejected mail order bride possibly influence the survival strategies of an entire people? And what would it cost her to discover whether the medicine woman's visions held truth, or merely the desperate hopes of a people facing impossible choices? The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain as Rebecca settled into her unexpected sanctuary, knowing that tomorrow would bring decisions that would echo far beyond her own uncertain future. Dawn broke across the desert with breathtaking intensity, painting the sandstone cliffs in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to set the very air ablaze. Rebecca woke to the sound of approaching horses, not the measured pace of casual travelers, but the urgent rhythm of riders with purpose. Through the trading post's eastern window, she could see dust clouds rising from the direction of Pine Ridge, multiple riders moving fast across the hardpan. Thomas emerged from the stable where he had spent the night, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt as he assessed the approaching party. 6 riders, he observed, shading his eyes against the rising sun. Cherokee, but not from my father's band. Rebecca joined him in the courtyard, her pulse quickening with apprehension. More complications? Likely. Thomas's expression grew grim as the riders drew closer. The lead horse carries Black Hawk's markings. Alina Winsong's father has come calling. The delegation thundered into the trading post compound with military precision, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. Chief Black Hawk himself led the group, a powerfully built man in his 50s with steel gray hair braided with silver ornaments and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the scene before him. His warriors flanked him in formation that spoke of long practice and absolute discipline. Behind the chief rode a young woman whose beauty was immediately striking. Alina Winsong possessed the classical features of Cherokee nobility: high cheekbones, intelligent dark eyes, and glossy black hair adorned with intricate beadwork. Her riding clothes were finely crafted, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect and deference. Thomas Crowfeather, Chief Black Hawk's voice carried across the courtyard with the authority of absolute command. You violate the terms of your banishment by remaining in this territory. Thomas stepped forward, his posture respectful but unrepentant. Chief Black Hawk, I honor your presence, though I dispute your interpretation of my father's judgment. The banishment specified that you would remove yourself from all Cherokee lands in this territory. Black Hawk continued, dismounting with fluid grace despite his age. Yet here you stand, not only defying that order, but harboring the white woman whose presence threatens the stability our alliance has created. Alina Winsong dismounted as well, her gaze shifting between Thomas and Rebecca with an expression that revealed layers of complexity beneath her composed exterior. When she spoke, her voice carried an unexpected note of something that might have been relief. "So this is the woman from the prophecy," she said in perfect English, addressing Rebecca directly. "The one whose arrival has caused such upheaval among our people." Rebecca found herself the focus of 6 pairs of assessing eyes, each measuring her against expectations she couldn't begin to understand. "I'm Rebecca Matthews," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster, "though I confess continued confusion about how my presence has become a matter of such concern to your people." Chief Black Hawk studied her with the intensity of a Sivas Sensistlate with the Azatauve Hawk studied her with the intensity of a Semta Simthafa Hawk evaluating potential prey. "Your presence has given my daughter's rejected suitor an excuse to challenge the arrangements that ensure our people's survival." Thomas Crow Feather clings to romantic notions about preserving traditions that the white government will never permit. His defiance threatens agreements that protect thousands of Cherokee from removal to distant reservations. "And yet, Elena," Windsong interjected, her tone carefully neutral, "perhaps it is time to examine whether these arrangements truly serve our people's interests, or merely postpone inevitable conflicts." The statement drew sharp looks from her father's warriors, but Black Hawk himself showed no surprise at his daughter's words. Rebecca sensed undercurrents of family tension that went far beyond the arranged marriage Thomas had rejected. "You speak like your rejected suitor," Chief Black Hawk observed to his daughter. "Romantic idealism that ignores practical realities." Elena's chin lifted slightly. "I speak as someone who has observed the consequences of constant accommodation. Each compromise we make requires the next one to seem reasonable. Where does such a path ultimately lead?" Thomas watched this exchange with obvious admiration for Elena's courage, but also careful neutrality that suggested he understood the delicate dynamics at play. Rebecca found herself studying the interaction between the 3 Cherokee nobles, beginning to grasp that the political situation was far more complex than she had initially understood. "Miss Matthews," Chief Black Hawk turned his attention back to Rebecca, "you find yourself at the center of conflicts that began long before your arrival. But your continued presence in this territory will force a resolution that may destroy the fragile peace we have maintained." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of additional hoofbeats echoed across the desert. Another party approached from the northwest, this one smaller but carrying themselves with unmistakable spiritual authority. Rebecca recognized Joseph Standing Wolf among the riders, but the central figure was an elderly Cherokee woman whose presence seemed to command attention from the very landscape around her. "Singing Crow," Thomas murmured, and Rebecca detected both reverence and apprehension in his voice. The medicine woman appeared to be in her 70s, but she sat on her horse with the ease of someone half her age. Her traditional dress was elaborately decorated with symbols that Rebecca didn't recognize, and the staff strapped to her saddle was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Most striking were her eyes' dark depths that seemed to see far beyond the immediate present. As Singing Crow's party entered the compound, a profound silence fell over the assembled groups. Even Chief Black Hawk's warriors straightened with obvious respect for the medicine woman's presence. Singing Crow dismounted with assistance from Standing Wolf, but once on the ground, she moved with surprising grace toward the center of the courtyard. Her gaze swept over the assembled Cherokee nobles before settling on Rebecca with intensity that made her feel as though her very soul was being examined. "The woman from the sunrise has accepted refuge with my banished grandson," Singing Crow observed, her voice carrying despite its softness. "The first part of the vision unfolds as foreseen." Rebecca stepped forward, drawing upon reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Grandmother Singing Crow," she began, using the respectful address she had heard Thomas employ, "I would be honored to understand what your visions reveal about my role in these matters." The medicine woman's weathered face showed approval at Rebecca's directness. "You do not fear the unknown child of the distant sunrise. This is well, for the path before you requires courage that few possess." Standing Wolf moved to his spiritual leader's side, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. The vision was clear about the signs that would mark the chosen woman, he announced to the assembled groups. Hair like autumn fire, eyes like deep forest pools, bearing the mark of abandonment from her own people. Any number of white women might match such general descriptions. Chief Black Hawk interjected, though his tone suggested he was going through the motions of skepticism rather than expressing genuine doubt. Singing Crow smiled with gentle patience. "The external signs merely identify the vessel, Black Hawk. The true test lies in what she carries within." The medicine woman gestured toward Rebecca. "Approach, child of the sunrise. Let us discover whether you possess the gift the spirits have promised." Rebecca moved closer, acutely aware that every eye in the compound was focused on her movements. "What kind of test?" "Not a test of knowledge or skill," Singing Crow replied, "but of the spirit that moves through you." She nodded to Standing Wolf, who began unwrapping the deerskin bundle. "These are sacred objects that respond only to certain kinds of spiritual energy. If you are truly the one from the vision, they will recognize your presence." The unwrapped bundle revealed items that Rebecca couldn't immediately identify: stones carved with intricate symbols, bundles of dried herbs tied with colorful threads, and what appeared to be a necklace made from unusual blue-green stones that seemed to catch and hold the morning light. "Place your hands upon the spirit stones," Singing Crow instructed, indicating the carved stones arranged in a specific pattern. "Empty your mind of fear and expectation. Allow whatever power moves through you to flow freely." Rebecca knelt beside the arranged stones, conscious of the weight of expectation surrounding her. She had no idea what she was supposed to do or feel, but she had committed to understanding her situation fully. Closing her eyes, she placed her palms flat against the carved surfaces. At first, she felt nothing beyond the warmth of the stone heated by the sun. But gradually, a strange tingling sensation began to spread through her hands, not unpleasant, but unlike anything she had experienced before. The tingling intensified, and she became aware of what felt like energy flowing between her palms. And the carved symbols, when she opened her eyes, the assembled Cherokee were staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to fear. The stones beneath her hands were glowing with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from within the carved symbols themselves. "The spirits acknowledge her," Standing Wolf whispered, his voice filled with awe. Elena Windsong moved closer, her eyes wide with wonder. "I have seen Singing Crow perform this test many times. Never have the spirit stones responded so strongly to anyone." Chief Black Hawk's expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching alarm. "What does this mean for our people?" Singing Crow studied Rebecca with profound satisfaction. "It means the spirits have chosen their instrument carefully. The gift she carries is powerful enough to heal the spiritual wounds that threaten to destroy us, but only if we have the courage to accept what that healing requires." Rebecca lifted her hands from the stones, which immediately ceased their glowing. The experience had left her feeling strangely energized yet drained, as though some fundamental change had occurred within her very being. "What exactly is this gift you speak of?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. "The ability to see and mend what others cannot," Singing Crow replied. "Not just physical ailments, but the spiritual injuries that come from abandoning one's true nature. Our people suffer from wounds invisible to ordinary sight, the pain of compromising essential beliefs, the corruption that comes from repeatedly choosing safety over truth." Thomas had moved closer during the ceremony, his face reflecting wonder at what he had witnessed. "And you believe Rebecca can heal such wounds?" "I believe she carries the power to help our people remember who they truly are," the medicine woman corrected. But such healing requires more than just her gift. It demands that those seeking wholeness have the courage to abandon the false security they have embraced. Chief Black Hawk's discomfort with this direction was obvious. You speak of abandoning the very strategies that have kept our people from the reservation system that destroyed so many other tribes. I speak of finding strength in truth rather than in compromise, Singing Crow replied firmly. The vision showed two possible futures, Black Hawk. In one, we continue the path of accommodation until nothing remains of Cherokee spirit except the name. In the other, we accept the healing this woman offers and find the courage to preserve what makes us who we are. Elena Windsong stepped forward, her decision apparently crystallizing as she listened to her grandmother's words. And if we choose the path of healing, what does that require of us? Crow's gaze shifted to her granddaughter with obvious affection. It requires that you stop accepting marriages arranged for political convenience rather than spiritual harmony. It requires that Thomas be permitted to return from banishment if he proves worthy through trial. And it requires that our people stop fragmenting our strength through accommodation with those who would diminish us. The implications of the medicine woman's words sent ripples of tension through both delegations. Rebecca found herself at the center of a spiritual and political transformation that she had neither sought nor fully understood. There must be trials, Chief Black Hawk said finally, his tone suggesting reluctant acceptance of inevitable change. If Thomas wishes to return from banishment, if Elena wishes to be released from betrothal obligations, if this woman claims the right to influence our people's spiritual direction, all must prove their worthiness through traditional tests. Thomas straightened, his expression resolute. I accept whatever trials the council deems appropriate. Elena nodded with equal determination. As do I. All eyes turned to Rebecca, who realized that her simple desire for shelter and understanding had evolved into something far more significant. Her choices would not only determine her own future, but potentially alter the course of an entire people's survival strategy. What would these trials involve? She asked, though she suspected she was committing herself regardless of the answer. 7 tests over 7 days, Singing Crow announced, her voice carrying the authority of ancient tradition. Tests of courage, wisdom, healing power, spiritual strength, endurance, compassion, and finally, the willingness to sacrifice personal desire for the greater good. Chief Black Hawk nodded slowly. If all 3 prove worthy through these trials, I will accept the dissolution of the betrothal arrangement and support Thomas's return from banishment. But if any fail, the accommodations we have made with territorial authorities must remain in place. Rebecca looked at Thomas and Elena, seeing in their faces the same mixture of determination and apprehension she felt within herself. 3 lives hung in the balance, but beyond that, the future identity of an entire people awaited the outcome of trials, designed to test not just individual worthiness, but the courage to choose authentic existence over comfortable compromise. I accept, Rebecca said, her voice carrying across the silent compound with unexpected strength. The desert wind seemed to pause in anticipation, as ancient forces set in motion by prophecy and spiritual vision prepared to determine whether the woman from the sunrise would prove worthy of the sacred trust the spirits had placed in her hands. The sacred grove chosen for the trials lay hidden within a canyon 20 miles northeast of the trading post, accessible only through a narrow passage between towering red sandstone walls. Ancient cottonwoods created a natural amphitheater around a spring that had run clear for countless generations, their massive trunks bearing scars from ceremonial fires that stretched back to the earliest Cherokee presence in this land. Rebecca rode between Thomas and Elena as their combined parties made the journey to this consecrated place, acutely aware that the next 7 days would determine not only her own fate, but the spiritual direction of an entire people. The weight of expectation felt crushing at times, yet she found unexpected strength in the quiet confidence both Thomas and Elena Displayed despite facing their own potentially life-altering trials, Singing Crow had spent the previous day in intensive preparation, consulting ancient scrolls and performing purification rituals that would sanctify the testing ground. As the eldest medicine woman in the territory, she carried responsibility for ensuring that the trials honored Cherokee tradition while addressing the unprecedented nature of the situation. Never before had the spiritual worthiness of a white woman been tested according to sacred law. The canyon revealed itself gradually as they navigated the narrow entrance passage. Walls of striated stone rose nearly 300 feet on either side, creating a sense of otherworldly isolation from the mundane concerns of territorial politics and cultural conflict. The sound of their horses' hooves echoed strangely in the confined space, seeming to announce their arrival to unseen spiritual forces. "This place has been sacred to our people since before memory," Elena explained quietly as they emerged into the grove proper. "Many of our greatest leaders underwent trials here, including my great-grandfather before he became chief of the southern bands." The natural amphitheater was more magnificent than Rebecca had imagined. The spring created a pool of crystalline water surrounded by carefully arranged stones that served as seating for witnesses and judges. Ancient symbols had been carved into selected tree trunks, their meanings known only to the spiritual leaders who maintained the traditional knowledge. Chief Running Bear and his council had arrived ahead of them, as had Chief Black Hawk's delegation. The two groups maintained careful separation that reflected the political tension surrounding these proceedings, but both showed appropriate reverence for the sacred nature of the location. Singing Crow stood at the center of the grove, her traditional ceremonial dress replaced by even more elaborate robes that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light. Standing Wolf flanked her, along with two other medicine people Rebecca had not previously encountered. An elderly man whose scarred face spoke of spiritual trials beyond ordinary experience, and a middle-aged woman whose eyes held depths of wisdom that suggested communion with forces beyond the physical world. "The spirits have accepted this place for the trials," Singing Crow announced as the parties assembled in the stone seating. "For 7 days, we will test whether these three possess the spiritual strength to guide our people toward their true destiny." Chief Running Bear rose from his position among the witnesses. "The trials will be conducted according to ancient law, but the stakes we face are unlike any our ancestors confronted. If these tests reveal worthy candidates, we must be prepared to abandon strategies that have governed our survival for a generation." Chief Black Hawk nodded grimly from across the amphitheater. "And if they fail, we must accept that accommodation. With territorial authorities remains our only viable path forward." The tension between the two chiefs was palpable, representing not just personal disagreement, but fundamentally different visions of Cherokee survival in an era of relentless pressure. From White Expansion. Singing Crow gestured for Rebecca, Thomas, and Elena to approach the center of the grove. "The first trial tests courage, not the courage of physical battle, but the spiritual bravery required to face one's deepest fears and continue forward despite them." Standing Wolf produced 3 identical clay vessels, each sealed with wax and marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Within each vessel lies a preparation that will induce spiritual visions. These visions will manifest your greatest fears in forms so real that distinguishing them from physical reality becomes impossible. You must face these fears without fleeing or seeking escape through denial. Rebecca felt her mouth go dry as she contemplated what her deepest fears might manifest as. Since childhood, she had struggled with dreams of abandonment and isolation, of being completely alone in an indifferent world. The prospect of experiencing such terrors with hallucinogenic intensity filled her with dread. Thomas accepted his vessel without hesitation, though Rebecca noticed the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he too anticipated difficult revelations. Elena's composure remained perfect, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her own clay container. The visions will begin within moments of consuming the preparation, the scarred medicine man explained in a voice roughened by decades of ceremonial smoke. They will continue until you either face your fears completely or are overcome by them. There is no predetermined duration. Some complete this trial in minutes, others require hours. The middle-aged medicine woman added, "Remember that no physical harm can come to you during the visions, but the spiritual and emotional impact will be entirely real. Courage lies not in the absence of fear, but in continuing forward despite its presence." Rebecca looked at her companions one final time before breaking the wax seal on her vessel. The liquid inside was dark green and smelled of bitter herbs mixed with something earthy and ancient. Thomas and Elena were performing the same preparations, their faces reflecting the same mixture of determination and apprehension she felt. Together, Elena said quietly, and the three raised their vessels in a simultaneous gesture of commitment. The taste was indescribably foul, like drinking liquid earth, mixed with the essence of decay. Rebecca fought not to gag as the preparation burned down her throat, leaving a metallic aftertaste that seemed to coat her entire mouth. Around her, the assembled witnesses settled into patient observation as the three candidates awaited the onset of their visions. The changes began subtly. Colors seemed to intensify, sounds became more distinct, and the boundaries between objects appeared to blur and shift. Rebecca found herself acutely aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every sensation of air moving across her skin. Then the grove began to dissolve. She found herself standing alone in an endless, gray landscape under a sky the color of old pewter. The silence was absolute, not the comfortable quiet of solitude, but the oppressive emptiness of complete abandonment. No matter which direction she turned, the featureless horizon stretched without variation or hope of change. "Rebecca!" The voice came from behind her, impossibly familiar despite the years since she had last heard it. She turned to find her mother standing 20 feet away, but not as she had been in life. This version of her mother was gaunt with consumption, blood staining her lips, eyes burning with fever and disappointment. "You abandoned us," her mother said, each word carrying the weight of absolute accusation. "You fled west to escape the responsibility of caring for dying parents. You chose your own comfort over our need." The accusation struck deep because it carried a grain of truth that Rebecca had never fully acknowledged. She had indeed felt relief when her parents' suffering finally ended. Relief that she was free to pursue her own life rather than continuing the exhausting vigil at their bedsides. "I stayed until the end," Rebecca protested, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "You stayed in body while your spirit fled," her mother replied, moving closer with movements that seemed to float rather than walk. "You counted the days until you would be free of us. You celebrated our deaths in your heart." Behind her mother, other figures began to materialize. Her father, equally ravaged by disease, equally accusing in his gaze. Friends from Boston who had whispered about her unseemly haste to sell her inheritance and travel west. Jacob Thornfield, pointing at her with contempt as he proclaimed her unworthy of even false promises. "Alone," her father whispered, the word echoing across the gray landscape with increasing volume. "Always alone. Abandoned by everyone who discovers your true nature." The circle of accusers tightened, their voices joining in a chorus that seemed to emerge from the very air around her. "Selfish, unworthy, destined for isolation. No one will ever truly want you." Rebecca felt the familiar panic of her childhood nightmares, the crushing weight of complete abandonment, the certainty that she was fundamentally flawed in some way that made lasting connection impossible. The fear threatened to overwhelm her completely, to send her fleeing across the endless gray landscape in search of escape that would never come. But as the accusers pressed closer, a different voice spoke within her mind, not the voice of fear, but of truth. "I made choices based on love," she said aloud, her voice gaining strength. I stayed with my parents through their suffering until they found peace. I came west not to escape responsibility, but to build something meaningful with my life. The gray landscape began to shift, colors bleeding through the oppressive uniformity. I have been abandoned by those who could not see my worth, but that reflects their limitations, not my inadequacy. Her mother's accusing face began to soften, the disease-ravaged features transforming back into the loving countenance Rebecca remembered from her childhood. You were a devoted daughter, this version of her mother said gently. Your choices came from strength, not weakness. The other accusers began to fade as Rebecca continued to speak her truth. I am not perfect, but I am worthy of love and companionship. My presence in this place, accepted by people who barely know me, proves that connection is possible when hearts are open to recognizing value. The gray landscape dissolved completely, revealing the sacred grove once more. Rebecca found herself kneeling beside the spring, her body drenched in sweat, but her spirit feeling strangely lightened. Around her, Thomas and Elena were undergoing their own trials, their faces reflecting the intensity of whatever visions they experienced. Thomas appeared to be fighting some kind of battle, his hands moving as though wielding weapons against invisible opponents. Sweat beaded his forehead, and occasionally he spoke words in Cherokee that sounded like war cries or challenges. Elena's trial seemed different. She sat motionless, but tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered what sounded like pleas or apologies. Her hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone white, and her entire body trembled with suppressed emotion. Singing Crow approached Rebecca with a gourd of clear water. The first trial is complete for you, the medicine woman said quietly. You faced your deepest fear and found truth stronger than terror. This is well. Rebecca accepted the water gratefully, using it to wash the taste of the vision-inducing preparation from her mouth. How do the others fare? Each must complete their own journey, Singing Crow replied. But I sense that all three will prove successful in this first test. Indeed, within another hour, both Thomas and Elena had emerged from their visions, both appearing drained but somehow purified by their experiences. Thomas's first words were to ask after Rebecca and Elena's well-being, while Elena immediately sought confirmation that her companions had also succeeded. The first trial is complete, Standing Wolf announced to the assembled witnesses. All three candidates have demonstrated the courage to face their deepest fears and find truth beyond terror. Chief Running Bear nodded with obvious satisfaction, while Chief Black Hawk's expression suggested grudging respect for what he had witnessed. Tomorrow brings the trial of wisdom, Singing Crow announced as the sun began to set behind the canyon walls. Tonight, rest and prepare your spirits for challenges that will test not just your knowledge, but your understanding of the connections that bind all life together. As they settled into temporary shelters arranged around the grove, Rebecca found herself sitting with Thomas and Elena beside the sacred spring, all three still processing their experiences of the day. What did you see? Elena asked quietly, her usual composed demeanor replaced by vulnerable curiosity. Thomas was the first to respond. I faced the fear that my principles would lead to the destruction of our people, that my refusal to compromise would result in the death or displacement of everyone I was meant to protect. And you found? Rebecca prompted. That compromise without honor destroys the very things we seek to preserve, Thomas replied. That sometimes the courage to stand for truth is the only path to real protection. Elena nodded slowly. I faced the fear that I was inherently unworthy of love, that my value existed only in the political alliances my marriage could create. Rebecca reached out to clasp Elena's hand. What truth did you discover? That my worth comes from my own spirit and choices, not from my usefulness to others' ambitions, Elena said with quiet conviction. That genuine love honors the whole person, not just their political value. When they turned to Rebecca expectantly, she found herself able to share without shame. I faced the fear of eternal abandonment, that I am fundamentally flawed in ways that make lasting connection impossible. And your truth? Thomas asked gently. That abandonment by those who cannot recognize my worth reflects their limitations, not my inadequacy, Rebecca replied. That I am here, accepted and valued by people who chose to see my true nature, proves that genuine connection is always possible. As the stars emerged in the narrow strip of sky visible above the canyon walls, the three trial candidates drew strength from their shared vulnerability and mutual support. The first test had revealed not just individual courage, but the foundation of trust that would be essential for whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring the trial of wisdom, followed by 5 more tests that would determine not just their personal futures, but the spiritual direction of an entire people. Yet sitting beside the sacred spring, under an infinity of stars, Rebecca Matthews felt for the first time since boarding that train in Boston that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The second dawn in the sacred grove brought with it an unexpected visitor that would transform the nature of the remaining trials. As morning mist rose from the spring and filtered through the ancient cottonwoods, a lone rider approached through the narrow canyon passage, a Cherokee woman whose arrival caused immediate tension among both delegations. Maria Singing Wolf dismounted, her exhausted horse with movements that spoke of desperate urgency. Blood stained her traveling clothes, and her usually immaculate appearance bore the marks of someone who had ridden through the night without rest. Rebecca recognized her immediately as one of the young healers from Chief Running Bear's village, though she had never spoken directly with the woman. Grandmother, Maria called the Singing Crow, using the respectful address reserved for the most honored medicine women. The fever sickness has come to 3 villages. Children are dying, and our traditional remedies bring no relief. The territorial doctor in Pine Ridge refuses to treat Cherokee patients, claiming his supplies are reserved for white settlers. A profound silence fell over the assembled witnesses as the implications of this news settled. Chief Black Hawk rose from his position among the observers, his face grave with concern. Which villages? He demanded. Peaceful Waters, where my sister's children live, Maria replied, tears forming in her eyes. Cedar Creek, where the trading clan maintains their winter lodges. And most severely, Hidden Springs, where nearly 20 children now burn with fever. That will not break. Elena Windsong stood abruptly, her usual composed demeanor cracking with visible distress. Hidden Springs is where my cousin lives with her twin daughters. They are barely 3 summers old. Thomas was already moving toward his horse, his expression resolute. The trials must be suspended. Our people's lives take precedence over any ceremony. But Singing Crow raised her staff, commanding attention from all present. The trials cannot be suspended, she declared firmly. They were ordained by spiritual vision, and to abandon them now would bring catastrophe far worse than any disease. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered face reflecting the impossible position they faced. Grandmother, with respect, we cannot continue these ceremonies while children die. We cannot abandon them while children die, the medicine woman corrected. Maria Singing Wolf, you have brought news that transforms these trials from test to necessity. The fever sickness is why the spirits sent us to the woman from the sunrise. All eyes turned to Rebecca, who felt the weight of expectation settling on her like a physical burden. You believe I can treat this illness? I believe the healing trial was meant to be conducted not in ceremony, but in the crucible of genuine need, Singing Crow replied. The spirits have provided the test. Will you accept it? Rebecca's mind raced through the medical knowledge she possessed. Fever sickness in children could indicate any number of ailments, from influenza to scarlet fever to more serious conditions that required precise treatment. Without proper examination and diagnostic tools, she would be working nearly blind. What are the specific symptoms? She asked Maria, switching to the clinical mindset that had served her during her brief medical training in Boston. "High fever that rises and falls but never fully breaks," Maria replied. "Rapid breathing, spots on the skin that come and go. And in the worst cases, delirium that makes the children cry out in their sleep." Rebecca recognized the pattern immediately: symptoms consistent with typhoid fever, the same disease that had claimed her parents. Her heart sank as she recalled the limited treatment options available even in well-equipped Eastern hospitals, let alone in the remote desert. "How many children are affected?" she asked. "Nearly 40 across the 3 villages," Maria said. "And the number grows each day." Elena moved to Rebecca's side, her voice urgent with determination. "I will accompany you. Many of these children are from my father's band, and I have some knowledge of traditional healing methods." Thomas nodded firmly. "As will I, the wisdom. Trial can be conducted through finding solutions to problems that threaten our people's survival." Chief Black Hawk's expression showed internal conflict between political caution and parental concern. "If you fail, if the children die despite your efforts, it will be seen as proof that accommodation with territorial authorities is our only path to accessing proper medical care. And if we succeed," Rebecca replied, "it will demonstrate that healing comes through combining the best of both traditions, not through abandoning our own knowledge in favor of distant authorities." Singing Crow smiled with satisfaction. "The wisdom trial begins now. You must determine how to treat an illness using limited resources while bridging the knowledge of 2 healing traditions. The healing trial follows immediately. Your success will be measured not by ceremony, but by the lives you preserve." Within an hour, a party of 12 riders departed the sacred grove, leaving the remaining witnesses to maintain vigil for their return. Rebecca rode beside Thomas and Elena, her mind focused on the medical challenges ahead while her heart grappled with the enormous responsibility she had accepted. Maria, singing Wolf, led them through terrain that varied from rocky desert to pine-covered hills, following ancient trails that connected Cherokee settlements scattered across the territory. As they traveled, Rebecca questioned her companions about the traditional remedies that had already been attempted. "Willow bark tea for the fever," Elena reported. "Pine needle infusions for breathing difficulties. Echinacea preparations to strengthen the body's fighting power. Grandmother Spotted Hawk, the healer at Hidden Springs, has tried everything in her traditional knowledge." "And the progression of the illness?" Rebecca asked, trying to construct a complete picture of what they would face. "Most children fall ill suddenly," Thomas replied. "Within a day, the fever begins. By the 3rd day, the skin spots appear. Those who survive past the 5th day typically recover, but many do not reach that point." Rebecca felt a chill of recognition. The timeline matched typhoid fever exactly, including the critical period around the 5th day when patients either turned toward recovery or succumbed to the disease. Her parents had died on the 6th day, despite every medical intervention available in Boston. But she also recognized an opportunity that Eastern doctors might not possess. The Cherokee healers understood herbal medicine at a level of sophistication that could complement her knowledge of disease progression and crisis management. If she could combine their plant-based remedies with proper sanitation and nursing care, they might achieve better results than either tradition could manage alone. The first village they reached was Peaceful Waters, where 6 children lay desperately ill in a large communal lodge that had been converted into a makeshift hospital. The scene that greeted Rebecca was heartbreakingly familiar. Worried parents, maintaining constant vigil beside small bodies burning with fever, the air thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and desperation. Grandmother Spotted Hawk proved to be a woman in her 60s with intelligent eyes and hands that moved with the confidence of decades spent healing. She welcomed Rebecca without the suspicion that white healers usually encountered, focusing entirely on the crisis at hand. "The fever climbs highest in the evening," she explained as Rebecca examined the first child, a boy of perhaps 7 who lay unconscious despite the cool cloths placed on his forehead. We have managed to keep them drinking water, but many refuse food completely. Rebecca recognized the symptoms immediately: rose-colored spots on the chest and abdomen, the characteristic high fever, the labored breathing that indicated the disease was affecting multiple organ systems. But she also noticed something the Cherokee healers had missed due to their different approach to patient care. "The children are lying too close together," she told Spotted Hawk urgently. "This illness spreads from person to person through contact. We must separate them and establish strict cleanliness protocols." Elena translated rapidly as Rebecca explained the concept of disease transmission, a theory that Cherokee medicine had not previously encountered. To their credit, the healers immediately began rearranging the lodge to space the patients farther apart. "Your willow bark tea is excellent for fever," Rebecca continued, "but we need to add something to help their bodies fight the infection itself. Do you have plants that reduce inflammation in the stomach and intestines?" Spotted Hawk's eyes lit with understanding. "The fever sickness affects the belly as well as the head?" "It affects the entire body," Rebecca confirmed, "but particularly the digestive system. The spots on the skin are a sign that the illness has spread through the blood." Working together, they developed a treatment protocol that combined Cherokee plant knowledge with Rebecca's understanding of disease management. Strict isolation procedures, enhanced herbal remedies targeting multiple symptoms, and careful monitoring of each child's progression through the critical phases of the illness. The wisdom trial revealed itself through the complex decisions required to allocate limited resources among 40 critically ill children across 3 villages. Rebecca found herself constantly choosing between competing priorities: which children required immediate attention, how to distribute medicines effectively, when to attempt more aggressive treatments, versus when to focus on comfort care. Elena proved invaluable as both translator and cultural bridge, helping Rebecca understand Cherokee approaches to illness while explaining Western medical concepts to traditional healers. Her knowledge of plant medicine surpassed Rebecca's, and her ability to calm frightened parents created space for effective treatment. Thomas took responsibility for organizing the practical aspects of care, ensuring clean water supplies, managing the flow of worried relatives, and coordinating communication between the 3 affected villages. His leadership abilities, honed through years of preparation for chieftainship, proved essential for maintaining order amid crisis. By the 3rd day of their mission, patterns began to emerge. Children who received the combined treatment protocol showed better outcomes than historical cases treated with traditional methods alone. The strict isolation procedures were preventing new infections among family members who had previously been contracting the disease through close contact with patients. But the real test came on the 4th evening, when little Sarah Crow Featherchief, Running Bear's own granddaughter, entered the critical phase of the illness. The 6-year-old girl had developed the most severe symptoms Rebecca had yet encountered, including the delirium and severely elevated fever that typically preceded either recovery or death. Rebecca worked through the night beside the child's bedside, adjusting herbal preparations every few hours, monitoring breathing and pulse, applying cooling treatments when the fever spiked beyond dangerous levels. Elena remained at her side, preparing medicines and translating between Rebecca's medical observations and the Cherokee healing prayers that grandmother Spotted Hawk maintained throughout the vigil. Thomas paced the lodge perimeter, his anxiety evident despite his attempts to project calm leadership. This child represented more than just another patient. She was the granddaughter of the chief who had first welcomed Rebecca, the symbol of whether their combined healing approach could truly succeed where traditional methods had failed. Dawn brought the crisis. Sarah's fever reached life-threatening levels, her small body convulsing with chills despite the desert heat outside the lodge. Rebecca faced the most critical decision of the entire mission: whether to attempt a dangerous intervention that might save the child's life or stabilize her condition and hope her body's natural defenses would prove sufficient. "The plant you call snake root," Rebecca said urgently to Spotted Hawk, "prepared as a very strong tea. It carries risks, but at this fever level, those risks may be acceptable." The Cherokee healer's eyes widened with understanding. Snake root was used only in the most desperate circumstances, its powerful properties capable of either breaking the most dangerous fevers or proving fatal to weakened patients. "You take full responsibility for this choice?" Spotted Hawk asked, recognizing the magnitude of what Rebecca proposed. "I do," Rebecca replied without hesitation. As they prepared the potent remedy, Elena took Rebecca's hand. "Whatever happens, you have already saved more children than we could have hoped. Sarah's parents understand the risks." The next hour passed in tense silence as the medicine took effect. Sarah's fever began to drop for the first time in days. Her breathing eased, and the delirium that had tormented her gradually subsided. By midday, she was conscious and asking for water, the first clear sign of recovery any of the severely ill children had shown. Word of Sarah's improvement spread rapidly through all 3 villages. Over the following 2 days, a pattern emerged that confirmed the effectiveness of their combined approach. Children treated with the integrated protocols showed dramatically better survival rates than historical cases. More importantly, the strict sanitation measures had virtually eliminated new infections. On the 7th day of their mission, which would have been the 5th trial back at the Sacred Grove, Rebecca found herself standing before a gathering of Cherokee healers from across the territory. The meeting had been called to evaluate the new treatment methods and determine whether they should be adopted as standard practice. Grandmother Spotted Hawk stood to address the assembled medicine workers. "The woman from the sunrise has shown U.S. ways to see illness that our traditions had not revealed. But more than new knowledge, she has demonstrated how healing grows stronger when different wisdoms join together rather than competing." Chief Running Bear, who had traveled from the Sacred Grove to check on his granddaughter's recovery, added his voice to the evaluation. "Sarah lives because a white woman was willing to risk everything on untested treatments, and because Cherokee healers were wise enough to recognize value in unfamiliar approaches." The formal assessment was unanimous. The combined treatment protocols had achieved results superior to either tradition working alone. But more significantly, the crisis had revealed something deeper about the nature of authentic strength versus compromised survival. As they prepared to return to the Sacred Grove, Rebecca realized that the wisdom and healing trials had been completed, not through ceremony, but through genuine service to those in need. She had proven her ability to bridge different knowledge systems while making life or death decisions under extreme pressure. Elena had demonstrated wisdom in recognizing when traditional boundaries needed to be crossed for the greater good. Thomas had shown leadership that unified people rather than dividing them along political lines. The ride back to the canyon felt different from their desperate journey a week earlier. They traveled now not as candidates hoping to prove themselves worthy, but as partners who had already demonstrated their value through actions that saved lives and built bridges between different ways of understanding the world. Singing Crow greeted their return with a smile that suggested she had expected exactly this outcome. "The spirits do not test us through artificial ceremonies," she observed as they dismounted in the Sacred Grove. "They test us by providing opportunities to serve purposes greater than ourselves." Chief Black Hawk approached Rebecca with an expression of grudging respect. "Your healing abilities have been proven beyond question. But 4 trials yet remain, and the most difficult tests lie ahead." Rebecca nodded, understanding that while she had succeeded in demonstrating competence as a healer and wisdom in bridging different knowledge systems, the challenges ahead would test her spiritual strength and ultimate commitment to the path she had chosen. The woman who had arrived in Pine Ridge as an abandoned mail-order bride was emerging as something far more significant, a bridge between worlds whose presence might determine whether an entire people could preserve their authentic identity while adapting to changing circumstances. Tomorrow would bring the trial of spiritual strength, followed by tests of endurance, compassion, and finally the willingness to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good. Each challenge would require her to reach deeper into reserves of character she was still discovering within herself. The 8th morning in the sacred grove dawned with an ominous stillness that seemed to press against the canyon walls like a living thing. No birds sang in the ancient cottonwoods, no breeze stirred the leaves, and even the sacred spring appeared to flow more quietly than usual. Rebecca woke from restless sleep with the unsettling sensation that unseen forces were gathering for something momentous. Singing Crow stood at the center of the grove before sunrise, her ceremonial robes replaced by simple traveling clothes, and her expression grave with purpose. Around her, the medicine people arranged objects Rebecca had never seen before: crystalline formations that seemed to pulse with internal light, bundles of herbs that released exotic fragrances when disturbed, and a circle of stones carved with symbols that appeared to shift and change when viewed directly. The trial of spiritual strength begins at dawn, the medicine woman announced as the assembled witnesses took their positions. This test cannot be conducted through ceremony or artificial challenge. The spirits themselves will provide the crucible, and only those with genuine power will survive what they bring. Thomas and Elena joined Rebecca near the sacred spring, both showing signs of the previous week's intense experiences. The medical crisis had drained them all physically and emotionally, yet had also forged bonds of trust and mutual respect that Rebecca knew would endure regardless of the trials. Outcome: what exactly does the trial of spiritual strength involve? Elena asked, studying the mysterious arrangements the medicine people had created. Standing Wolf approached, carrying a leather pouch that seemed to radiate warmth despite the cool morning air. The trial tests your ability to channel spiritual energy for purposes beyond yourself, to serve as a conduit for forces that can heal, protect, or guide others through darkness. He opened the pouch to reveal a collection of small objects that defied easy description, stones that seemed to contain swirling mists, fragments of what might have been bone or wood that glowed with soft inner light, and crystalline shards that chimed with musical tones when they touched each other. These are spirit anchors, Standing Wolf explained, created by medicine workers over generations and charged with spiritual energy through decades of ceremony. They respond only to individuals who possess the rare ability to channel power beyond their personal capacity. Rebecca examined the objects with growing apprehension. Throughout her journey west, she had experienced strange sensations, moments when her hands seemed to generate warmth during healing work, times when she instinctively knew things about people's health that couldn't be explained through observation alone, but she had attributed these experiences to heightened awareness rather than supernatural ability. What happens if someone lacks this channeling ability? Thomas asked, his protective instincts clearly aroused by the mystical nature of the challenge. The scarred medicine man answered grimly, "The spirit anchors will reject them violently. The spiritual energy they contain will discharge in ways that can cause permanent harm to body and mind." Before anyone could respond to this sobering information, a commotion erupted at the canyon entrance. Riders approached at desperate speed, a party of Cherokee warriors, whose horses were lathered with sweat and whose urgent shouts echoed off the stone walls. The lead rider thundered into the grove, without regard for the sacred nature of the proceedings. "Chief Black Hawk," he called. Territorial soldiers marched toward Hidden Springs Village. They carry orders to arrest Cherokee leaders for harboring fugitives and resisting federal authority. Chief Black Hawk rose from his position among the witnesses, his face darkening with fury and concern. What fugitives? What resistance? The soldiers claim that Thomas Crow Feather's presence in this territory violates federal treaties, the messenger replied breathlessly. They say his refusal To relocate to designated reservation lands constitutes an act of rebellion that voids our legal protections. Rebecca felt her blood turn cold as the implications became clear. Thomas's banishment from his own people had been an internal Cherokee matter, but federal authorities were now using his presence to justify broader actions against all Cherokee. Settlements in the territory. Alina stepped forward, her composed demeanor cracking with visible distress. How many soldiers? 50 cavalrymen with orders to arrest any Cherokee leaders who cannot produce documentation of federal permission to remain on these lands, the messenger said. They plan to reach Hidden Springs by midday. Chief Running Bear joined his counterpart. Both men now facing a crisis that transcended the trials entirely. Hidden Springs has no such documentation. Our treaty rights were negotiated with territorial authorities, not federal officials. Singing Crow raised her staff, commanding attention from the agitated groups. The trials cannot be abandoned now. The spiritual forces have been summoned and must be properly concluded, or catastrophe will follow. Grandmother, with respect. We cannot continue ceremonies while our people face arrest and possible removal, Chief Blackhawk protested. We cannot abandon the ceremonies while our people face their greatest crisis, the medicine woman corrected firmly. The trial of spiritual strength was meant for exactly this moment, to determine whether these three can channel power sufficient to protect our communities from forces beyond ordinary resistance. Thomas was already moving toward his horse. I must turn myself into the soldier. My presence is the excuse they're using to threaten innocent families. Your surrender will not stop them, Elena said with bitter certainty. Federal policy seeks to remove all Cherokee from valuable territory. They will simply find other excuses once you're in custody. Rebecca found herself at the center of a crisis that combined political urgency with spiritual necessity. The trial of spiritual strength was no longer an abstract test, but an immediate requirement for protecting people she had come to care deeply about. What would channeling spiritual energy actually accomplish against armed soldiers? She asked Singing Crow directly. Properly channeled spiritual power can create barriers that physical force cannot penetrate, the medicine woman replied. It can turn aside violence, confuse hostile intentions, and protect the innocent through means that transcend material limitations. Standing Wolf added urgently, but such channeling requires spiritual strength far beyond normal human capacity. The attempt could destroy anyone who lacks the necessary gift. Rebecca looked at the spirit anchors, then at Thomas and Elena, then at the assembled Cherokee leaders whose people faced imminent threat. Every instinct told her that accepting this challenge carried enormous personal risk, but the alternative was watching helplessly as federal forces destroyed communities she had helped heal. How does the channeling work? She asked, surprised. By the steadiness of her own voice. You must hold the spirit anchors while opening yourself completely to the spiritual forces they contain. Singing Crow explained rapidly. Allow the energy to flow through you without trying to control or direct it. If you possess the gift, the power will know its purpose. If you lack it, if I lack it, the energy discharge could kill me, Rebecca finished. I understand. Alina grasped her arm. Rebecca, you don't have to do this. We'll find other ways. To protect our people. What other ways? Rebecca asked gently. Hide in the desert while soldiers destroy villages? Scatter families across the territory while they hunt for stragglers? At least this offers a chance to prevent such a catastrophe. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression reflecting both admiration and concern for her decision. If you're determined to attempt this, Elena and I will anchor you to the physical world. Spirit channeling can cause complete dissociation from normal awareness. Rebecca knelt beside the collection of spirit anchors, acutely aware that the next few minutes would determine not just her survival, but the fate of multiple Cherokee communities. The objects seemed to pulse with increasing intensity as she approached, almost as though they recognized her presence. Clear your mind of fear and expectation. Singing Crow instructed as Rebecca positioned her hands above the glowing artifacts. Spiritual energy responds to intention, not technique. Focus on protecting the innocent and let the power find its own expression. Rebecca closed her eyes and placed her palms flat against the spirit anchors. The initial sensation was warmth, quickly followed by a tingling that seemed to travel up her arms and spread throughout her entire body. But instead of the painful discharge she had feared, the energy felt strangely familiar, like coming home to a place she had never been but always belonged. The tingling intensified into something that could only be described as electrical, yet without discomfort. Rebecca felt her awareness expanding beyond the boundaries of her physical body, her consciousness somehow encompassing the entire grove, then the canyon, then the desert beyond. She could sense the approaching soldiers as points of aggressive intention moving across the landscape toward Hidden Springs Village. More remarkably, she could perceive the spiritual energy networks that connected all living things in the territory, threads of light that linked the Cherokee communities, the plant and animal life, even the geological features of the landscape itself. The spirit anchors were not generating power, but helping her access a vast energy system that had always existed, but remained invisible to ordinary perception. Through this expanded awareness, Rebecca began to understand what the medicine woman had meant by channeling spiritual power for protection. The energy network could be influenced, redirected, concentrated in ways that would affect the physical world without violating its fundamental laws, working instinctively rather than through conscious planning. Rebecca began to gather and focus the spiritual energy surrounding Hidden Springs Village, not to create violent confrontation with the approaching soldiers, but to generate what could only be described as a field of confusion and disorientation that would make finding the settlement nearly impossible. The process required her to surrender personal control completely, becoming a conduit for forces far greater than individual will. She felt her identity dissolving into something larger, while simultaneously becoming more herself than ever before. The paradox was both terrifying and exhilarating. Time seemed to function differently during the channeling. Rebecca was dimly aware of voices around her, Thomas and Elena speaking words of encouragement, Singing Crow chanting in Cherokee, the medicine people maintaining prayers that helped stabilize the spiritual working. But her primary attention remained focused on the energy patterns she was learning to influence. Gradually, she began to sense success. The aggressive intentions she had perceived approaching Hidden Springs were becoming scattered, confused, uncertain of direction or purpose. The soldiers were still present in the landscape, but their ability to locate and threaten the Cherokee village was dissolving into bewilderment and disorientation. The effort required to maintain this spiritual working proved enormous. Rebecca felt her physical strength draining, as though she were bleeding energy into the protective barrier she was creating. Her hands began to shake where they touched the spirit anchors, and she became aware of Elena's voice calling her name with increasing urgency. "Rebecca, you must return now," Elena was saying. "You've been channeling for nearly 2 hours. Much longer, and you may not be able to find your way back to normal awareness." With tremendous effort, Rebecca began to withdraw her consciousness from the vast energy network she had accessed. The process felt like trying to compress an ocean into a teacup. Her expanded awareness resisted, returning to the limitations of individual identity and physical embodiment. But gradually, with Elena and Thomas providing verbal anchors to ordinary reality, Rebecca managed to separate herself from the spiritual channeling. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself surrounded by odd faces and the spirit anchors now glowing so brightly they were difficult to look at directly. "The soldiers?" she asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Turned back toward Pine Ridge in complete confusion. Chief Black Hawk reported with wonder in his voice. Scouts report they became lost despite having detailed maps and local guides. They wandered in circles for hours before abandoning their mission entirely. Standing, Wolf examined the spirit anchors with amazement. These objects have been charged with more spiritual energy than our most powerful medicine workers have ever channeled. The protection you created will shield hidden springs for months to come. But the toll of the spiritual working on Rebecca was severe. She felt drained beyond anything physical exhaustion could explain, as though essential parts of herself had been stretched to their absolute limits. Elena and Thomas helped her to the sacred spring, where the medicine people prepared restorative herbs, designed to help spiritual channelers recover from intensive workings. The trial of spiritual strength is complete, Singing Crow announced to the assembled witnesses. Never have I seen such powerful channeling from someone previously untrained in the spiritual arts. Chief Running Bear approached with deep respect evident in his manner. You have protected our people through means we barely understand. The debt we owe cannot be measured. But even as Rebecca absorbed the praise and gratitude surrounding her, she was becoming aware that her spiritual channeling had triggered something unexpected. The energy network she had accessed remained partially visible to her ordinary awareness, as though the experience had permanently altered her perception of reality. More disturbing, she could sense that her channeling had drawn attention from spiritual forces beyond those the Cherokee medicine people usually contacted. Something vast and ancient had noticed her use of power, and its interest felt both benevolent and potentially dangerous. 2 trials remain, Elena said quietly as they helped Rebecca recover her strength, endurance, and compassion. But after what you've just accomplished, those challenges seem almost anticlimactic. Thomas nodded agreement, but his expression suggested concern rather than relief. The spiritual channeling has changed you, Rebecca. I can see it in your eyes. You're perceiving things the rest of us cannot. Rebecca realized he was correct. Her vision now included layers of reality that had been invisible before the channeling. She could see the spiritual energy that flowed through every living thing, the emotional auras that surrounded each person, the connections that linked all consciousness in ways that transcended physical proximity. Is this permanent? She asked, Singing Crow with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. The gift you have awakened will never completely fade, the medicine woman replied. But you will learn to control when and how you access these expanded perceptions. For now, rest and allow your spirit to adjust to its new capabilities. As the day progressed and Rebecca gradually recovered from the intensive spiritual working, news arrived that confirmed the protection she had created was holding. The federal soldiers had indeed returned to Pine Ridge in confusion, reporting to their commanders that Hidden Springs Village could not be located despite detailed intelligence about its position. More significantly, other Cherokee communities in the territory were requesting similar spiritual protection. Word was spreading through indigenous networks about the white woman who could channel power sufficient to turn aside federal authority without violence. The trial of endurance begins tomorrow, Standing Wolf announced as evening approached. But the nature of that test has been altered by today's events. You must now demonstrate the stamina to maintain spiritual protection over multiple communities while preserving your own sanity and health. Rebecca contemplated this challenge with a growing understanding of what her acceptance of the trials truly meant. She was no longer simply proving her worthiness to remain in Cherokee territory. She was accepting responsibility for protecting an entire people through abilities she was still learning to control. The abandoned mail-order bride had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds whose spiritual power might determine whether indigenous communities could survive federal pressure without compromising their essential identity. Tomorrow's trial would test whether she possessed the endurance to fulfill such an enormous responsibility without losing herself in the process. The 10th dawn in the sacred grove arrived with portents that even the least spiritually sensitive could perceive. The ancient cottonwoods rustled without wind. The sacred spring ran clearer than crystal, and the very air seemed to shimmer with anticipation. Rebecca woke to find her expanded spiritual awareness more acute than ever. She could see the energy patterns that connected every living thing in the canyon, the emotional auras of the assembled witnesses, and something else that filled her with both wonder and trepidation. Thomas Crow Feather stood at the eastern edge of the grove, silhouetted against the rising sun in traditional ceremonial dress she had never seen him wear. Eagle feathers adorned his hair, intricate beadwork covered his chest, and war paint marked his face in patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. But most striking was the transformation in his spiritual presence, where before she had sensed strength and integrity. Now she perceived something that could only be described as sacred authority. "The final trials begin," Singing Crow announced, her aged voice carrying across the grove with surprising power. Endurance, compassion, and the willingness to sacrifice personal desire for the greater good. But these tests will not be conducted separately. They will unfold together in a single crucible that will determine not just individual worthiness, but the spiritual direction of our people for generations to come. Alina Windsong approached Rebecca with an expression that mixed excitement, apprehension, and something deeper that might have been recognition of destiny unfolding. Like Thomas, she wore elaborate traditional dress, but more significantly, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had found her true purpose. The trials of endurance and compassion will be tested through a spiritual working, unlike anything attempted in Cherokee memory, Alina explained quietly. You must use your channeling abilities to create permanent protection over all Cherokee territories in this region, not just temporary confusion for federal soldiers, but spiritual barriers that will shield our people from all forms of hostile interference. Rebecca felt her breath catch as the magnitude of this challenge became clear. Permanent protection for an entire territory? The energy required would be enormous. I'm not certain human consciousness can channel that much spiritual power without being destroyed in the process. Standing Wolf approached carrying bundles that seemed to radiate heat despite the cool morning air, which is why the trial of compassion must be integrated with endurance. You cannot accomplish this working alone. It requires willing participants who will share the spiritual load and anchor you to physical reality. He began unwrapping objects that made the spirit anchors from the previous trial seem modest by comparison. These were crystalline formations the size of human heads, carved from what appeared to be single pieces of translucent stone that contained swirling galaxies of light. Ancient symbols covered their surfaces, seeming to move and shift when viewed directly. These are the great anchors, Singing Crow explained reverently. Created by our ancestors during the time of the Long Peace, before white settlers came to these lands. They were designed to channel spiritual energy on a scale that could protect entire peoples. But using them requires multiple participants willing to risk their lives for the greater good. Chief Running Bear and Chief Black Hawk approached together, their usual political differences set aside in the face of what was being proposed. The compassion trial tests whether you can inspire such willing sacrifice from others, Running Bear explained. Not through coercion or manipulation, but through genuine love and trust that makes people choose to share extreme risk for collective benefit. Rebecca studied the great anchors with a growing understanding of what lay ahead. Who would participate in such a working? Any who choose to, Elena replied. But the spiritual strain will be divided among all participants. More people means less individual risk, but also less focused power. Too few participants means the energy load could kill everyone involved. Thomas stepped forward, his painted face solemn with purpose. I will anchor the northern quadrant if you accept this challenge. Elena nodded immediately. I will take the southern. One by one, other volunteers came forward. Maria Singing Wolf, who had brought news of the fever outbreak. Grandmother Spotted Hawk, the master healer from Hidden Springs. Joseph Standing Wolf. And the scarred medicine man whose names Rebecca had never learned. young Cherokee warriors who had witnessed her protection of their villages. Even Chief Running Bear and Chief Black Hawk stepped forward, their political differences forgotten in the face of spiritual necessity. But the most unexpected volunteer was a white man who had arrived with the dawn, Dr. William Caldwell, the young physician who had taken over Jacob Thornfield's abandoned practice in Pine Ridge. "Mrs. Matthews," he said formally, "I've come to apologize for my profession's failure to treat Cherokee patients during the fever outbreak, and to request permission to participate in whatever working you're attempting." Rebecca stared at him in surprise. "Dr. Caldwell, this isn't a medical procedure. The spiritual channeling could kill anyone who lacks the necessary resilience." "I observed the children you saved using combined healing methods," he replied firmly. "I've seen the spiritual protection that turned aside federal soldiers. Whatever you're doing transcends conventional medicine, and I want to learn from it, rather than continuing the ignorant prejudices of territorial medical practice." Singing Crow studied the assembled volunteers with satisfaction. 18 participants, she observed. "The sacred number for great workings. This is as the spirits intended." The preparation for the great working required most of the day. Each participant underwent purification rituals designed to align their spiritual energy with the collective purpose. Rebecca found herself at the center of increasingly complex ceremonies that seemed to blur the boundaries between Cherokee tradition and something older, more universal. "The working will require you to channel spiritual energy on a scale that could permanently alter your consciousness," the medicine woman warned as they arranged the great anchors in a pattern that encompassed the entire grove. "You may find it impossible to return to normal human awareness afterward." Rebecca contemplated this possibility with surprising calm. Over the past 10 days, she had already changed beyond recognition from the desperate woman who had been abandoned at Pine Ridge Station. The prospect of further transformation felt less like loss than like completion of some process that had begun the moment she chose to remain in the territory rather than fleeing back to Boston. "What about the others?" she asked, watching as Thomas and Elena took their positions at the northern and southern points of the energy pattern. "They will be changed as well," Singing Crow acknowledged. "All who participate in great workings carry marks of the experience for the remainder of their lives. But the risk is shared willingly, out of love for what they seek to protect." As sunset approached, the 18 participants arranged themselves around the great anchors, according to patterns that had been established through centuries of Cherokee spiritual practice. Rebecca found herself at the center of the formation, her hands placed on the largest crystalline structure, while the others created a network of energy connections that would allow the spiritual power to flow through all of them simultaneously. "Working begins at the moment of sunset," Standing Wolf announced. "Once started, it cannot be stopped until completion or until the energy discharge destroys us all. There will be no opportunity for second thoughts or withdrawal." Rebecca looked around the circle of faces illuminated by the dying light. Cherokee leaders who had set aside political differences, healers who were risking their lives for their people's protection, warriors who chose spiritual battle over physical violence, and a white doctor who was willing to transcend the prejudices of his profession for the chance to learn genuine healing. "I'm honored by your trust," she said simply. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The sun touched the canyon rim as Rebecca placed her palms against the great anchor. The initial sensation was familiar from her previous spiritual channeling, but magnified beyond anything she had experienced. Energy flowed through her in waves that seemed powerful enough to shatter ordinary consciousness. Yet the network of participants provided stability that allowed her to remain centered while accessing forces of unimaginable magnitude. Through her expanded awareness, Rebecca perceived the spiritual geography of the entire territory, not just the physical landscape, but the energy patterns that connected all life within hundreds of square miles. Cherokee villages appeared as nodes of warm light, while hostile intentions showed as dark spots moving across the spiritual terrain. But this time, instead of creating temporary confusion or misdirection, Rebecca began weaving permanent spiritual barriers that would protect the Cherokee territories from all forms of negative interference. The process required her to understand and work with energy patterns so complex that normal human consciousness could barely perceive them, let alone manipulate them effectively. The network of participants provided both power and grounding. Through Thomas, she accessed the warrior's courage needed to face the danger of the working. Through Elena, she drew upon the compassion necessary to create protection rather than destruction. Through the medicine people, she gained the wisdom to work with spiritual forces rather than trying to dominate them. Dr. Caldwell's participation proved unexpectedly valuable. His medical training provided a systematic approach to monitoring the physical toll the working exacted on all participants. His presence also served as a bridge between Cherokee spiritual practice and the broader world of territorial settlement, somehow making the protective barriers more inclusive rather than exclusionary. Hours passed in a state of consciousness that transcended normal time. Rebecca was simultaneously aware of her individual identity and dissolved into the collective spiritual working. She could feel the barriers taking shape across the territory, not walls that would exclude others, but fields of energy that would redirect hostile intentions and inspire peaceful cooperation instead of conflict. The endurance trial revealed itself through the sustained effort required to maintain such intensive spiritual channeling. Several times during the night, Rebecca felt her consciousness beginning to fragment under the strain, but the network of participants provided anchoring that allowed her to continue. The compassion trial manifested through her growing awareness of how her choices affected not just herself, but everyone who had chosen to share this risk with her. But the greatest test, the willingness to sacrifice personal desire for the greater good, came near dawn when Rebecca realized that successfully completing the great working would require her to abandon any possibility of returning to normal life. The level of spiritual awakening necessary to create permanent territorial protection would make ordinary human existence impossible. She would become something between human and spirit, permanently changed by the forces she was channeling. Her relationship with Thomas, her friendship with Elena, her hopes for a simple life in this territory, all would be transformed beyond recognition by what she was choosing to become. For a moment, the temptation to withdraw from the working was overwhelming. She could stop now, accept partial success, and preserve the possibility of human love and normal relationships. The barriers she had already created would provide significant protection for Cherokee communities, even if they weren't permanent. But through the network of participants, she sensed the depth of trust they had placed in her willingness to sacrifice everything for their protection. Thomas's love for her was real, but his greater love for his people made him willing to lose her if that was the price of their spiritual security. Elena's friendship was genuine, but her compassion for future generations made her willing to accept whatever transformation was required. Rebecca made her choice. Instead of withdrawing from the spiritual channeling, she opened herself completely to the forces flowing through the great anchors. Her individual consciousness dissolved into something vast and universal, while simultaneously becoming more intensely herself than ever before. The barriers she was creating became part of her essential being, making her a permanent guardian of the spiritual territory she was protecting. The transformation was beyond description, death and birth occurring simultaneously, individual identity being destroyed and recreated at a level that transcended ordinary human understanding. When it was complete, Rebecca Matthews, the abandoned mail-order bride, had ceased to exist, replaced by something that was both more and less than human. Dawn broke to find the 18 participants collapsed around the great anchors, their bodies bearing the marks of spiritual exhaustion, but their faces peaceful with the satisfaction of completed purpose. The crystalline formations themselves had been transformed, no longer glowing with stored energy but appearing to be ordinary stone, all their accumulated power now woven permanently into the spiritual fabric of the territory. Thomas was the first to recover, his warrior's constitution allowing him to rise despite the enormous drain of the night's working. He approached Rebecca with an expression that mixed joy, loss, and something deeper than either. She stood among the great anchors, still recognizably herself but clearly transformed by forces beyond ordinary experience. Her auburn hair now held threads of silver that seemed to shift between colors depending on the light. Her green eyes contained depths that suggested communion with vast spiritual realities. Most significantly, her presence radiated a sense of otherworldly authority that made everyone instinctively treat her with reverence. "Rebecca?" Thomas said quietly, uncertainty evident in his voice. She turned to him with a smile that was entirely familiar yet somehow eternal. "I'm still myself, Thomas. But I'm also something more now, a guardian who will always be connected to this land and its people." Elena approached with wonder evident in her expression. "The barriers are in place. I can sense them extending across the entire territory, not walls, but fields of influence that will inspire cooperation instead of conflict." Chief Running Bear and Chief Black Hawk rose together, their political differences seeming insignificant after the night's shared spiritual experience. "What does this mean for our people's future?" Running Bear asked. Rebecca, though she would soon be known by a Cherokee name that meant Spirit Walker Between Worlds, gazed across the sacred grove with perceptions that now encompassed both physical and spiritual reality simultaneously. "It means the accommodation approach and the resistance approach can both be abandoned in favor of something new," she said. "The spiritual barriers will influence everyone who enters Cherokee territory: settlers, soldiers, territorial officials, inspiring them to seek cooperation rather than domination. Your people will no longer need to choose between compromising your identity and facing forced removal." Dr. Caldwell, who had been changed by the working in ways he was still discovering, approached with the reverence of someone who had witnessed miracles beyond medical explanation. "Mrs. Matthews, or whatever name you prefer now, I want to establish a medical school that teaches healing approaches combining Cherokee plant knowledge with Western surgical techniques. Would you serve as an instructor?" The offer represented a bridge between worlds that neither culture could have imagined before the Great Working. Rebecca nodded with satisfaction that such cooperation was already beginning to manifest. "Elena will be my primary partner in that endeavor," she replied. "Her knowledge of traditional healing surpasses mine, and her political understanding will be essential for navigating territorial authorities." Elena stepped forward with determination that reflected her own transformation through spiritual working. "I formally renounce my betrothal to any arranged marriage," she announced to both chiefs. "My path lies in healing and teaching, not in political alliances that serve others' purposes." Chief Black Hawk, whose entire worldview had been altered by participating in the Great Working, nodded with surprising acceptance. "The old strategies are no longer necessary. If spiritual protection can accomplish what political maneuvering could not, then personal choice becomes possible again." Thomas approached Rebecca with an understanding that transcended words. "You've become something beyond ordinary human love," he observed without bitterness, "but not beyond love itself." "No," Rebecca agreed, reaching out to touch his face with hands that now carried permanent traces of spiritual energy. "Not beyond love, but transformed into love that encompasses more than just personal desire. I will always care for you, but my primary relationship is now with the spiritual forces that flow through this land. Then I accept the role of protector." "To one who protects others," Thomas said with formal dignity. "If you're willing to have a guardian who understands that his love must serve your larger purpose." The proposal represented a relationship unlike anything either culture had previously recognized. Not marriage in the conventional sense, but spiritual partnership that honored both individual choice and collective responsibility. Standing Wolf, whose own spiritual abilities had been enhanced by participation in the Great Working, spoke with authority that commanded attention from all present. The trials are complete. Rebecca Matthews has proven herself worthy not just of acceptance among our people, but of the sacred role she has claimed. Thomas Crow Feather has demonstrated the wisdom to love without possessing. Elena Windsong has shown the courage to choose authentic purpose over comfortable tradition. Singing Crow, whose weathered face now bore a satisfaction that suggested prophecies fulfilled, added her ceremonial conclusion. The woman from the sunrise has become the guardian of the sacred territory. Her presence will ensure that this land remains a place where different peoples can coexist in peace rather than conflict, where healing traditions can combine rather than compete, where political accommodation serves spiritual rather than replacing it. As the participants in the Great Working gradually recovered their strength and prepared to return to their communities, Rebecca found herself contemplating the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 10 days earlier, she had been a desperate woman with no options beyond accepting charity or returning east in defeat. Now she stood as a spiritual guardian whose choices would influence the development of an entire territory, the rejected male order. Bride had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds, whose presence made cooperation possible without requiring either culture to abandon its essential identity. The spiritual barriers she had created would inspire harmony rather than forcing it, allowing natural evolution rather than imposed change. Caldwell's Medical School would become the first institution in the territory to formally combine Cherokee and European healing knowledge. Elena would emerge as its primary Cherokee instructor, while Rebecca served as a spiritual advisor whose insights transcended conventional medical training. Thomas would indeed become Rebecca's guardian and partner, but their relationship would serve as a model for connection that honored individual transformation rather than trying to prevent it. Their union would be celebrated not as conquest of the exotic other, but as recognition that love grows stronger when it serves purposes greater than personal desire. Chief Running Bear and Chief Black Hawk would return to their people not as political rivals, but as leaders who had shared spiritual experience profound enough to transform their understanding of what leadership required. The accommodation and resistance strategies that had divided Cherokee communities would be replaced by approaches that preserved authentic identity while engaging constructively with inevitable change. Most significantly, the spiritual barriers Rebecca had created would influence territorial development in ways that neither culture could have achieved alone. Settlers would find themselves drawn to cooperative rather than exploitative relationships with Cherokee communities. Federal officials would discover that their aggressive policies consistently failed when applied to the protected territory, leading them to develop more respectful approaches. Traders, missionaries, and territorial administrators would experience subtle but persistent impulses toward fairness and mutual benefit rather than one-sided advantage. As the sun reached its zenith on the 10th day, Rebecca Matthews, now known as Spirit Walker Between Worlds, stood at the center of the sacred grove with her spiritual family gathered around her. The woman who had been rejected at Pine Ridge Station had found not just acceptance, but a sacred purpose that would endure for generations. The mail order bride, who had carried nothing but broken promises and $20, had become a guardian whose spiritual wealth would protect entire communities. The abandoned woman who had faced the choice between desperate return and uncertain future had created a third option that transcended the limitations both cultures had previously accepted. In claiming her as sacred, Thomas Crow Feather and the Cherokee people had not only gained a protector, but had helped birth a new kind of relationship between indigenous and immigrant peoples, one based on spiritual recognition rather than political calculation, on mutual enhancement rather than competitive domination. The rejected bride's journey west had ended not in the security she had originally sought, but in the discovery of power and purpose she had never imagined possible. Her healing touch, first recognized by desperate need and Cherokee wisdom, had become the foundation for transformation that would echo through history long after her individual story was forgotten. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the sacred grove, Rebecca Matthews started the journey back to her new life, no longer traveling as an abandoned woman seeking refuge, but as a spiritual guardian returning home to territory she would protect with her very essence. The rejected mail-order bride had become the sacred foundation for a future neither culture could have achieved alone. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.